On this week's episode of the NESN College Hockey Podcast, we look back at last weekend's action of games, give you our 3 stars in Hockey East, look forward to a great weekend of action on NESN and the NESN networks, and we talk to UNH head coach Mike Souza. Welcome everybody to another edition of the NESN College Hockey Podcast. I'm Dakota Randall, and it's going to be a little bit different this week than normal because this week's episode is a solo show. I am by myself here in the NESN studio, Studio D. I'm all by myself, so we'll see how this goes. You know, I have a tendency to talk to myself in the dark anyway, so maybe this won't be that bad. But this episode comes in advance of next week where we will debut a new co-host, that is Patrick McAvoy. We're excited to get Pat into the fold. He's a big Merrimack hockey guy, so obviously I'm a big UNH fan, so we'll see how that goes. But yeah, so this is going to be a solo show just by myself. It's also going to be on the shorter side in terms of analysis and recaps because we have a great interview with UNH head coach Mike Souza that went on for a little bit. We talked about a lot of stuff, had a little bit of fun towards the end, talked about UNH history and everything. So a lot of the space in this podcast will be saved for that interview. But we are still going to look back at the week that was in college hockey and Hockey East. And it was a great week. Some upsets, a lot of great results, a lot of shifting in the polls. We're also going to look ahead towards the weekend of, this weekend's action across the country, as well as all the games on NESN. And we have a great schedule of games on NESN, including Friday. We have women's hockey, Brown at Harvard. That's at 3:30 on NESN. Also on Friday, we have number 15 BC men's hockey at UNH. We'll get to that later. Number 3 UMass at number 10 Northeastern. That's on NESN+. Then Saturday, 2 women's hockey matchups. Number 9 at BU at number 4 Northeastern. That's on NESN. Number 7 BC, Providence at number 7 BC at 4 p.m. on NESN+. And then the nightcap men's hockey, number 10 Northeastern at number 3 UMass. Also on NESN+. And again, all of our Hockey East coverage is brought to you by Rockland Trust, where each relationship matters. So we'll get to all the stuff for this weekend in a little bit. But let's look back, at the week that was. And we usually like to start off this podcast with our 3 stars of the week in Hockey East. Again, this is a college hockey podcast. We talk about the whole landscape of college hockey, but because we're in the region that we're in, and because of NESN's new partnership with Rockland Trust, we like to just keep it within Hockey East for our 3 stars. Because listen, if I had to go over all of college hockey for my 3 stars, it would be too tough if I'm going to be completely honest with you. So I'm just going to keep it in Hockey East. We're going to start with my number 1 star. That's Jack Dugan at Providence. He scored and had 2 assists in a 6-2 win at BC. Big win for the Friars over the Eagles. Then he had 2 assists and an overtime loss to Lowell. Dugan leads all of the NCAA in scoring with 14 points and a nation-best 10 assists. And again, he's been a great player for Providence, which is up to number 8 in the polls. We spoke to Nate Lehman earlier in the season. He had high hopes for Dugan, and he's come out and had a great start to the season. And the Friars, once again, look like one of the best teams in the country. Moving on from there, my number 2 star, Patrick Harper. And he's been also really great for BU this season. We talked to head coach Albie O'Connell last week, and he really thought Harper had stepped up in place of Ty Monte, who was out for the season with an injury. But Harper had a great weekend. He factored in all 3 goals in a 3-3 draw with UMass Lowell on Friday. He found the back of the net twice and had an assist. And then he had an assist on the game-winning goal in the Terriers' victory over UNH on Saturday. Again, he's played really well in the place of Ty Monte, been one of the best players on the Terriers this year. BU's been a little bit up and down, still trying to figure out what kind of team they are, but I think Patrick Harper, has really solidified himself as one of the best players on that team. And the number 3, I could have gone in a lot of different directions with this one, but I went Max Gilden, junior defenseman for UNH. I decided to go with UNH player because we're going to talk a lot about UNH in this podcast. He had a goal and 1 assist in UNH's 3-2 overtime win at Merrimack on Friday night. And he's been really great. He set up the first goal of the game and then lifted the Wildcats to a 2-1 lead in the 3rd period. He has 1 point, or he's posting 1.4 points per game, and that is tied for first in the nation for defensemen. So again, Max Gilden, probably not a guy you hear about all the time, definitely not a household name or popular name for college hockey fans, but he's been a great player for UNH and someone they're going to need to lean on as they get further into their schedule. So again, that's my 3 stars of the week. Definitely not the only great performers across Hockey East. TJ Walsh over at Northeastern did really well. Tyler Wall, the goalie at UMass Lowell, had a big weekend. Logan Hutsko at BC, Robert Master-Simone at BU, Sam Tucker at BU, John Leonard at UMass. A lot of great performances again, plenty to choose from, but those are the three that I went with. So anyway, now let's get into some of the results that we saw last week. And again, there was a lot of, I thought, a lot of great games, a lot of games that we talked about in last week's podcast that we were looking forward to, and a lot of action that didn't disappoint. So let's get right into it. BC loses 6-2 to Providence. Now, the Eagles, we've talked all season, they've been one of the best teams in college, or they're supposed to be one of the best teams in college hockey. They certainly looked like that at the beginning of the season when they played Wisconsin and they beat Wisconsin. They have this great incoming freshman class. Everyone sort of expects them to be in the conversation for the national championship by the end of the season, and I still think they're going to get there, but they're definitely scuffling right now. Again, they lost 6-2 to Providence. They've lost 3 in a row, and that's, so they lost to Providence, and that's coming off of losing 2 in a row to Denver, and they're down to all the way to 15th in the national rankings. So again, I expect BC to rebound, but again, 3 in a row against quality opponents, sure, but definitely kind of a tough stretch here for the Eagles. Minnesota Duluth, similarly, they had lost 3 of 4, including a sweep at the hands of Wisconsin, but they got back on track with a sweep of in-state rival Minnesota. I believe Minnesota entered that series number 20th in the country, obviously down from where they've been in the past, but they're still a great program, and that in-state rivalry, those games are always close. But Minnesota Duluth swept that series, so that maybe they've gone back on track. Now they're back up to number 6. Of course, Minnesota Duluth searching for the three-peat defending national champions, going for 3 in a row. They are trying to become the first team since 1951 through 53 Michigan to get a three-peat in college hockey. That's the only three-peat we've ever seen in college hockey. So the odds are against Minnesota Duluth, but again, they're such an excellent team. If anybody's going to pull it off, it's them. So yeah, it looks like they might have gone back on track this weekend. We'll see how it goes going forward. UMass Lowell, I thought, had a great weekend, even though they didn't win both games, but I thought they still performed really well. They tied BU after being down 3-0 at one point in that game. They battled all the way back, earned the tie, and then they earned an overtime win the next night against Providence, which of course is, we talked about Providence. They're a great team, so that's a great win for Lowell. They're now 4-2-2 and up to number 17th in the country. And again, they're not doing it with some of the players you see over at BC, these guys that are Hobie Baker candidates, that are some of the best players in the country. They have 1 NHL draft pick in the forwards group and just 1 on defense. So again, they're doing it with a mix of young guys, sort of older guys, just really tough team that sort of wears you down, and just play really great team hockey. And so they've made the tournament in 5. They made the tournament in 5 of the first 6 seasons under head coach Norm Bazin, but have missed the last 2. So people have been wondering, is UMass Lowell kind of going back on the downslide? Are they, when are they going to get back into the tournament? What kind of team are they? Where do they fit into Hockey East? So again, they made it the tournament in 5 of the first 6 seasons under Norm Bazin, missed the last 2. So if you ask me, I think they're perfectly capable of making the tournament this season. I think, I take them. I don't think they're one of the best teams in the country per se, but I like their chances against anybody on any given night. And they showed it again this weekend. And I just think going forward, they're definitely a team to watch out for. Who else? Let's look at Northeastern. I think Northeastern had a good weekend. They are in a road split with number 14 St. Cloud State, which is a very good team. Northeastern just continues to be one of the better programs in the country. Rookie forward TJ Walsh dished out 2 assists. And then sophomore Tyler Madden added a pair of goals in that game as well. So again, the Huskies just continue to have a good season. Other notable games from around the country. UMass Amherst with a 4-1 win over American International in a Western Massachusetts showdown. I've been sort of following American International all season to see, they made it to the finals of the Western Regional in the tournament last year, I believe. I forget who they lost to, St. Cloud State maybe. I don't know, I forget. Regardless, I wanted to see, were they just a flash in the pan? Was that just a one-off? A small school, obviously they don't do a ton of, they don't get a ton in recruiting. So how are they going to follow it up this season? And, they're not winning a ton of games, but they've been competitive. They looked really good against Quinnipiac. They've looked good in some other games. So they lose this game 4-1. But again, we're talking, UMass is the number 3 team in the country, so it's hard to really get on American International for that one. But regardless, that was a game that I was looking forward to, and UMass kind of asserted itself in that one. Robert Morris upsets Penn State. Penn State, who also lost to Alaska Fairbanks last week. So maybe Penn State isn't as good as we once thought. They're all the way down to number 12 in the country after at one point being as high as number 6. So we'll see. Alaska Fairbanks and Alaska Anchorage split. I was looking forward to that one because, again, battle of the two Alaska schools. There's been a lot of drama up there in terms of those two programs might merge, the schools might merge. There's been talk of whether they'll even have sports next season. There's just a lot of drama. I don't really know too much about it. I don't think anybody really does. It has a lot to do with money, as you could imagine. But regardless, I think just the battle of the two Alaska teams, both teams get a ton of penalties. So I wish I was there to watch it. Unfortunately, I couldn't watch it. But the results anyway, I think Alaska Fairbanks is the better team. So it was good for Anchorage to go in there and get a split. Western Michigan and Michigan split in a battle of the Michigans. There are just too many Michigan teams on the national scene. I need a couple of them to lose a few games, if I'm being honest, because I can't keep track of Northern Michigan, Western Michigan, Michigan Tech, Michigan State, Michigan University. There's too many. But regardless, Western Michigan and Michigan split. And then number 11 Clarkson beat Wisconsin 4-0 before losing the next night 4-3. So Wisconsin and Clarkson split. I think this game says more about this series says more about Clarkson. I believe they're number 14th in the country now, something like that. Regardless, Wisconsin has sort of proven itself to be one of the more talented teams in the nation so far. And for Clarkson to get a split out of that, I think it just sort of proves that both teams are what we thought they were. And that's, a couple of very good teams. So before we get into UNH and the interview with Mike Souza, I just kind of want to go over the polls because, again, there was a lot of shifting around with a lot of teams in the rankings losing. So just go through it real quick. We'll obviously mention the Hockey East teams as well. Denver stays at number 1. They had the week off, so they stay at number 1, followed by Minnesota State, UMass, Cornell, Notre Dame at number 5, Minnesota Duluth up to number 6 after sweeping Minnesota, Wisconsin at number 7, Providence at number 8, Quinnipiac at number 9, Northeastern at number 10, then Clarkson, Penn State, Ohio State, North Dakota, BC all the way down to number 15, St. Cloud State at 16, UMass Lowell 17, Bowling Green, an interesting program, good team to watch. Number 19, Harvard, they haven't even played a game yet. They get into action this weekend. We'll get into that in a little bit. And then number 20, Northern Michigan. Other teams receiving votes, Western Michigan, Omaha, Michigan, RIT, BU, Minnesota, Brown, Bemidji State. So yeah, a lot of shuffling around. Ton of Hockey East teams in the rankings, as there always are. So yeah, we'll see. Obviously, I'm sure there'll be more upsets this weekend and a lot of different results that'll switch them up yet again. So yeah, those are the national rankings. So let's get into UNH. They beat Merrimack in overtime last weekend and then lost 3-0 to BU. Listen, the Wildcats are what they are at this point. They're not at the top of Hockey East. They certainly can compete with anybody on any given night, but there's no doubt the program is down from where it once was. That said, there's still a program with a ton of tradition and a ton of pride. And so, they have Mike Souza is now in his second year over there. And I've been I think UNH is going to turn things around this year, and I think we've seen a little bit of that in their play thus far. Listen, last season, I think they had 14 one-goal games. They set a record for the most one-goal games or the most overtime games or ties, something like that. And, it's been a question that Souza and his staff hasn't been able to avoid is, how do you start getting on the other side of these games? How do you start winning sort of these close battles? And so far, I think they have 4 one-goal games already, 2 ties, an overtime loss, something like that. Regardless, they've been in close games again, but I think they've shown out better in those and they've had some better results. So we talked with Mike Souza a lot about that. They got BC this weekend in a game on NESN, and then they have Dartmouth, so we also talked about that. And listen, I've been a UNH fan my entire life. I was probably a UNH hockey fan before I was a Red Sox fan, a Patriots fan, a Bruins fan, Celtics fan, anything. I used to go to games with my uncle, my aunt, my father, and his friends all the time. I was always going to the Whittemore Center. I really loved going to those games, and they were packed. I remember the national championship game in '99 when they lost to Maine, and then a couple years later against Minnesota. So again, I always have a soft spot for UNH. I've always said if they finally win a championship, I'll get my first tattoo. I don't know what the tattoo would be, but again, I've always really followed them close and been a big fan. So it was a pleasure for me to talk to Mike Souza and sort of look back and talk about some of the great players in UNH history. So without any further ado, let's get into our interview with UNH head coach Mike Souza. I'm here with UNH head coach Mike Souza. Listen, so coach, last year you guys had a ton of close games, and most of the time your way. We talked a few weeks back, and you expressed optimism that the experience could help your team start to come out on the right side of those close games. You've got an overtime win, an overtime loss, and a tie this year. You just had a pretty close game with BU. How do you feel your team's performing in those close games this year compared to last?
Yeah, that's it's an obvious question to ask right now. We played 5 games, 3 overtime games, and as a coaching staff, we were I don't want to say laughing about it, but we were chuckling that it looks like people say when you're in overtime games early, you're going to be in them all year. So it's I don't think it's a bad thing. I mean, but because you know what, I think the team has to learn to play in tight games. We did it last year. I think it shows how much parity there is in college hockey. It shows how close the margin of victory or defeat is, week in, week out, game in, game out. And, for our takeaways from those games for us this year, to be quite honest with you, I mean, the Miami game is one that comes to mind as it being real disappointing when you have a 3-0 lead, and you give it away, and then, you fight back to tie it. So that one hurts a little bit. And then last week down at Bentley, I give Ryan Soderquist's team a lot of credit. They were harder than us in that game. They were more physical than us, and they forced us to turn the puck over, and we paid the price in overtime. So, you know what? It is what it is. You know what? And this past week we were right back at it again. Similar game against Merrimack to the one against Bentley, but found ourselves in overtime, and we were able to, make one more play than them. And I was proud of our guys for their response on Friday for sure.
Yeah, I think I saw after the game against BU, I heard you say something to the effect of you thought your guys gave BU too much respect in the first period. Do you think do you want to see your team maybe sort of go out there believing that they can compete or believe that they're better than some of these, some of the upper echelon teams in Hockey East?
Yeah, I mean, if you want to be one, you sure better, believe you're one. I mean, we talk about it all the time. I want our players to understand that we have some talented kids in our locker room too, and we got some tough kids in our locker room, and we've got some depth in our locker room. And I think, I'm hoping that the third period against BU on Saturday was a real awakening moment for our team, because I thought we played our best period of hockey Saturday night. I know we lost. You never want to lose,
Right.
But I was proud of the way our guys fought, competed, and I'm hoping we can build off of that into this week against Boston College.
Yeah, so let's get into that. Obviously a big weekend coming up with BC and Dartmouth. Let's stick to that BC game first. They've looked great this season. They really have some talented new guys on that team. What have your initial impressions been of the Eagles?
Yeah, I mean, it's a similar situation to playing BU on Friday. I think that's why I said what I did about, if you want to compete against the best players and the best teams in the country, you're going to be playing against lineups that are filled with, high-level prospects and depth, and it's just the nature of being, in that upper echelon of college hockey, which is what ultimately we're all chasing. And, Boston College, year in and year out has the ability to attract some of the best prospects that are out there that want to play college hockey, and they went and did a great job of finding those kids and bringing them to Chestnut Hill this year. I think that our guys just have to focus on UNH, and have a little bit of, momentum or confidence, off of what we were able to do on Saturday, albeit in a loss. I do think there was a lot of good takeaways from Saturday night, and Boston College, they're going to present some of the same problems that BU presented in terms of, they got some high-level kids, whether it's, Boldy or Newhook or Spencer Knight in net. And, it's a great challenge for us, and I'm excited to see how we respond.
So let's stick on your guys now. So one of the headlines going into the season was the addition of Ty Conklin to the coaching staff. Obviously, legendary goal at UNH, someone you played with in the early 2000s or late 90s, went to a national championship with him. What has it meant having him on your staff?
Yeah, I think the obvious thing is that stares everyone in the face is the impact that he has on our goaltenders on a daily basis. The overarching and kind of what was most attractive to me was that, obviously, that he was going to have that such an impact on our two goaltenders in particular. both being prospects, NHL draft picks. But what probably a lot of people, don't realize is the impact that he has on our overall team, our overall coaching staff. You're talking about a guy who played in 3 Stanley Cup finals, has played with Hall of Famers, in several cities, whether it's Sidney Crosby or Nick Lidstrom in Detroit, and
right.
was on those great teams. I mean, and then playing for guys like Mike Babcock and Ken Hitchcock, and he's been around the game at the highest level. Not only been around the game at the highest level, he's been amongst the greatest guys to ever be, to be present in the game. So he brings that with him too. I mean, you know what? He has he's got strong opinions, and we welcome him to our staff. He's done a great job at really being a part of our staff, not just working with our goaltenders. And that was what I was ultimately hoping for, and that's what he's done for us here in the early going.
Great. Well, as far as the skaters, non-goaltenders, you've gotten some great production early on out of guys like Sato and Charlie Kelleher this season. What have you seen from those guys so far, and just overall some of your skilled players, what you've seen on offense?
Yeah, I mean, I think if you take Kohei Sato, I think his experience last year with the Japanese men's national team and going there and then having some success has really helped to elevate his game. He's still a work in progress. He's still a kid that has a long way to go, I think, in terms of his play away from the puck. The thing that jumps out at you when you watch Kohei play is he may be the fastest kid in Hockey East. And we were just Jeff Giuliano and I were just talking. He's had at least one breakaway, I think, in every game, and then he had 2 breakaways in each game this weekend. So that's a nice problem for us to have, his speed in our lineup. And then Charlie Kelleher and Jackson Pearson have played very well for us in the early going. Both guys that aren't real big, but very competitive at the puck, very cerebral players, and then they bring a nice skill package with them. Both kids have, really good hands, really good vision, both good skaters, and they're not big, but they understand. They understand offense. They understand, spatial recognition, when to move the puck, where to move it, how to protect it. And those things are innate traits that they have that a lot of guys don't have. And that's helped them to produce some points here in the early part of the year.
Great. So I just got a couple more. What have been your overall impressions of hockey so far this season? Obviously, it's always one of the best leagues in the country, but this year in particular, there seem to be a lot of good teams. Just sort of, what have you thought so far, and where do you think you guys fit into the whole picture?
Yeah, it's a great question. Not having seen the whole league yet, it's a really hard thing to comment on. I just, follow. You follow the games just like everybody else. You talk to, some NHL scouts that have seen most, if not all, the teams, and it's no surprise that it's going to be an incredibly competitive year within the league. It's how we probably expect it to go. You have your teams that you sort of expect to be near the top, based on their personnel and past history. But you know what? There's no easy night in our league. I think everyone that's been around this league for a long time understands that on any given night, if you're not ready, if you don't bring your A game, you're going to find yourself on the short end of the stick. And if you do bring your A game, chances are, you're going to be in an incredibly competitive game. And it doesn't necessarily mean you're going to win, because that's how competitive our league is. But it puts a huge onus on just being prepared and being mentally tough and just, the hard thing with our league is we only play. I wish we played more games, because I love it. I love the grind of it. I know our kids do, and I'm excited to see how it all shakes out at the end of the year.
Well, listen, staying on that same topic, I grew up a huge UNH hockey fan. I grew up with season tickets, went to all the games, and I remember when UNH was really the pinnacle of Hockey East, and it really wasn't, they obviously still a marquee program, but it's been a while since you guys have been in sort of the national conversation for the, for the tournament and everything. But I think just the simple fact that teams like, when I was younger, teams like Providence and UMass Lowell and Merrimack really struggled, and now, Merrimack's down now, but they were really good a few years ago. UMass Lowell and Providence are at the top, so I think it obviously kind of goes in cycles. So, what do you think it's going to take for you guys, your program, to come back around to be at the top of Hockey East, to be one of those perennial powerhouses?
I think that's a great question. If I had a crystal ball and I can answer that probably definitively. I think it's going to require. I hope that I'd like to think a lot of the work that we've been doing is going to require continued support from our university, which I get, from our athletic department, which I get, and then it's going to require a ton of work on our end in the hockey department with recruiting. Making sure that we're doing all the necessary things recruiting-wise that we need to do to make sure we're bringing the right people to UNH, the right players to UNH, and I think our guys are doing a good job with that. And as you said, I mean, you know what? There's really good coaches in our league. Everyone's chasing the same thing, and it's not only incredibly competitive on the ice; it's incredibly competitive off the ice. I don't think there's a magic formula to getting it done. It's just I'd like to think that we got a lot of really good pieces in place. I think we've got some nice pieces coming in, and I'm excited to see us grow as a program. I thought we took a step last year. I hope to take another big step this year. I mean, as you mentioned before, I mean, all I know about this place is excellence and being in the national tournament and being in the conversation in that upper echelon of college hockey. I didn't take the job not to be in that conversation.
Right. Yeah. Well, I mean, listen, I hope it happens soon because me and my cousin have always said, I don't have any tattoos, but I've always said the only one I would get is if UNH wins a national championship, then I would finally get a tattoo. So I hope it happens. I want to, one more, just want to kind of go off script, have a little fun, just sort of talking about UNH hockey history and everything. If you could do a shootout, 5 rounds of a shootout, and you had to do, to pick any UNH players, any throwback UNH players in the program's history, I guess, factoring out yourself and guys on the current team. If you had to pick 5 guys to field for a shootout of 5 rounds, who would you go with? You want to hear mine first?
That's a great question. That's a great question. I'd say, I'll tell you what, I'd pick Darren Hadar, Jason Krog would be there, Ralph Cox would be there, Gordy Clark.
Okay.
And I'll tell you, Stewie would probably pick, Amodio or Mitrovic, but I'll tell you what. I talked to the team about this the other day, and it's reflecting on what you just mentioned. Probably one of the most unheralded but elite players we've had here is Sato Kelleher.
Yeah.
And I think that's indicative of what he's doing over at Sweden. So I'd pick him to probably shoot in that shootout too. So.
Yeah, we almost had the same exact one. My 5 were Ralph Cox, Jason Krog, Andy Brickley I went with, NESN guy, Darren Hadar, and then I was kind of tossing up between Colin Hemingway, Paul Thompson, and James Van Riemsdyk, but I went with Van Riemsdyk because he's a 30-goal scorer in the NHL, so I figured I'd roll with him.
Yeah, but the one thing about breakaways is if you look at the history, if you want to really get into the weeds here.
Sure.
Shootouts. There's certain guys that go in shootouts, not necessarily big-time scorers.
True.
So, I always think of this kid Jeff Hamilton that I played with at Yale. He's got one of the all-time. I didn't play with him at Yale. I played with him in the minors, but he's one of the all-time leading scorers in shootout percentage history in the NHL. You wouldn't be a guy that comes to the top of your. And I don't know if that's changed. That was a few years ago, but. Yeah, that's why that was a good question. So that's kind of fun. So I'm sure I'll get some crap for not picking certain guys, like Mowers and a couple of guys that.
That's a good one, Mowers.
Yeah, Mowers was good on breakaways for sure.
Yeah, I mean we could go down the rabbit hole for a while on that one. I'm sure there's a ton of guys.
That's why you never with these lists. I don't love lists because you know what, you're always going to leave. You're always going to leave somebody off, and everyone's got an opinion. That's why I always respect and Coach Emilio never retiring anyone's jersey because where do you begin?
Right, exactly. All right, Coach. Well, I'll let you get out of here. I want to thank you again for taking time to talk to us, and good luck this weekend. And I hope to talk to you down the road.
Yeah, feel free to check in whenever you want.
All right, cool. I really appreciate it. Have a good one, Coach.
All right, you too. Bye.
Welcome back, everybody. Again, I want to thank UNH head coach Mike Souza. Really enjoyed talking to him. He had a lot of interesting things to say about his program and where his team is at. Sort of love talking about, some of the best players from UNH history with him. And overall, again, I enjoy talking to Coach Souza. I think he's done a good job up there, and I look forward to seeing how that program progresses as the season goes on. Again, we're looking forward to their game this weekend. Let's give you the NESN schedule one more time. Starts Friday with women's hockey, Brown at Harvard. That's 3:30 on NESN. And then number 15, BC at UNH. That's at 7 on NESN. And then number 3, UMass at number 10, Northeastern at 7 on NESN+. Saturday, we've got a couple women's hockey matchups. Number 9, BU at number 4, Northeastern. That's at 3:30 on NESN. Then Providence at number 7, BC. That's at 4 p.m. on NESN+. And the nightcap, men's hockey, number 10, Northeastern at number 3, UMass at 8 o'clock on NESN+. And remember, all of our hockey's coverage here at NESN is brought to you by Rockland Trust, where each relationship matters. Okay, we don't have a lot of time left, so I just want to get into the games that I'm looking forward to this weekend. There's a lot, but I'm just going to mention a few. Dartmouth at Harvard. Harvard enters the season ranked at number 19, and is considered a good program every year. They've had a lot of good success over the past few seasons, and they sort of asserted themselves as a team and a program that needs to be respected on a yearly basis. Dartmouth, on the other hand, got a lot of preseason love. They've received votes in the national polls. They haven't actually been in the top 20. Again, they haven't played a game either. But they've gotten more love in the preseason rankings than UNH has. UNH hasn't gotten any votes, so you could say that Dartmouth, for now, is the best team in New Hampshire. I'm also looking forward to UNH and Dartmouth this weekend as well, see if we can get a little bit of an in-state rivalry going. But I think that game's going to be interesting to see. I think Harvard and Dartmouth are probably pretty close in terms of talent, but I just want to see how that game shakes out. See which program, where they both stand, because again, neither of them have played so far. So I think that's one to watch out for. Number 18, Bowling Green. I mentioned Bowling Green is a program to keep your eye on. They're at number 2, Minnesota State, for a pair of games. Listen, Minnesota State, they could make the case for being the best team in the country over Denver and Minnesota Duluth. They're just an absolute wagon. But, Bowling Green's nothing to snuff at. I think this is a prime spot. It's 2 games. It's hard to sweep a quality team back-to-back nights. So I'm just thinking maybe there's going to be an upset this weekend. I wouldn't pick it, but it wouldn't shock me at all. I think Bowling Green's that good. And then another one to look out for if we're talking about upsets, Niagara, 0-4 Niagara, 0-5 if you count the exhibition game, at number 1 Denver for a pair of games. Listen, Niagara is 0-4, but they played Minnesota tough. I think one of those games went to overtime. And again, Minnesota's nothing great this season, but they've sniffed around in the national polls, and they're always a quality program. So Niagara played them tough, and Denver has had 2 weeks off. So the question, of course, is are they going to be rusty? They're probably too good to have any sort of rust, especially against, honestly, a bad team in Niagara. Bad might be strong, but just a not very good team in Niagara. So I'm just wondering, is it kind of a trap game? Does Niagara catch Denver sleeping on the first night, maybe get an early lead, and then Denver's forced to play catch up, and maybe they can't quite get there? So don't be shocked if we get number 1 in the country upset this weekend. Again, I wouldn't pick it, but it wouldn't surprise me. I just think it's one of those tricky spots. How does having 2 weeks off affect the Pioneers? We'll find out. Number 7, Wisconsin, at number 12, Penn State for a pair of games. Penn State scuffling. Again, they're all the way down to number 12. Wisconsin split with Clarkson. So I just want to, again, I don't think it's going to mean so much for Wisconsin because, again, these are 2 quality teams. I just think it means more for Penn State. If Penn State loses both of these games, what does that say about them? Obviously you're losing to a good team in Wisconsin, but they're going to slide further down the rankings. I think that'll be 4 consecutive losses, whatever it may be. So I just think it's important for Penn State to come out this week and at least win one of those games, just to remind everyone, hey, we've scuffled a little bit, but we're still no joke. We're still a great program. We still need to be taken seriously. So that's another one worth watching out for. BC at Providence speaks for itself. It should be a great game. Jerry York versus Nate Lehman. Just a ton of great players on, a ton of NHL prospects, draft picks. Just a lot of talent on the ice. That should be an awesome game. The Alaska teams, again, I don't know why. I just like following the Alaska teams for some dumb reason. Anchorage has 2 games against Omaha. Omaha is in Alaska to face Alaska Anchorage. I don't know why. It just strikes me. It's just kind of funny to imagine a team from Nebraska going up to Alaska. Just you talk about just 2 polar opposites in terms of where they are in the country. So I'm just curious to see what that game looks like. And then Alaska Fairbanks has Bemidji State in a matchup of a couple quality teams. Both of them sort of live in that also receiving votes section of the national polls. Neither are probably going to be any real threats come tournament time. But again, a couple of quality teams, and I want to see how that goes. I want to see, Alaska's been playing well. Alaska Fairbanks rather has been playing well this season, as has Bemidji State. So I just want to see how that goes. And again, there's a ton of games across the country that are worth watching this weekend, but those are some of the ones that I'm really looking out for. Again, we got a lot of great games on NESN, on both NESN and NESN Plus, that you should look out for. Again, just another great weekend of college hockey lined up. I'm looking forward to it. I'm sure you are as well. But it's time for us to get out of here. Again, I want to thank UNH head coach Mike Souza for speaking with us. I really enjoyed that. And, looking forward to Pat McAvoy making his debut as my co-host next weekend. I don't think hosting by myself went poorly. If I'm being completely honest, I'm a little dry in the throat right now, and I think I've just been talking too much. So it's definitely harder than it looks. So next time you think about making fun of the Colin Cowards of the world, think twice, because it's a lot harder than it sounds. So anyway, I'm looking forward to get Pat in here next week, bounce some ideas off of him, see where he stands on all this stuff. And yeah, I'm looking forward to it. So again, thanks everybody for listening, and we'll catch you next week.